What's up guys, Roku here, and we're back with some more League of Legends content, and today I've got an interesting video for you guys. This is Roku's updated Season 11 top lane tier list. I do believe the patch at the time of the recording is 11.9, but this tier list should be relevant next patch as well, right? Now, some of you might remember that I've already made like a tier list for champions, and that video was more so along the lines of like, the champions in general without like, accounting for how strong they are at the current time. But this tier list is basically kind of like different from that. This is basically just the strongest champions right now, basically, right? So the best champions right now to play. And yeah, we're just going to get right into it. I'm going to explain all of the tiers, like my specific decisions for them, right? And I'm going to basically explain what each of these tiers mean. And then I'm going to get down to every single champion and justify my decisions as to why I put them there, right? So S tier is basically like the best champions in Soloq, right? These guys are good into almost every single situation. They're insanely good, like Soloq champions. They have all the traits of good top laners, and it's just like if you want to rank up quickly, these are the guys you want to play, basically, right? A tier. Now, these guys are also pretty good champions if given the right player. All the champions in A tier are also very good, right? They're also perfectly playable, but they're just not like as crazy as the ones up here, right? These guys are just insane, but these guys are also pretty strong, but just not like, whoa, crazy, you know? B tier. Now, these are basically the champions that are all just, regular tier champions, but this slot is mostly reserved for counter picks and for high elo picks. Now, like a lot of champions, right, demand more than just champion knowledge to play them, right? Some champions require you to be very good at the game first and then get into the champion, or, you have to be good at the game to play the champion properly is what I mean, right? And so I put those champions in B tier because if you're someone who's watching this video and, you're not the best at this game, then I can't put Rengar or like, Gangplank or Gnar at like A tier or S tier because you're not going to get good at, like you're not going to operate with those champions well, even after 100 games. You need to fundamentally know how the things around the game work, right? Like those kinds of champions are here. Counter picks are here, and champions who just like, are pretty okay, but are either counterpicked by certain things or are just like, a bit awkward, right? C and D tier are basically the same. I'm just gonna put Swain up here because this tier doesn't really matter. Wait, yeah, this tier doesn't really matter, right? C, D tier. These are all the champions that are top lane, but I just think are not really worth playing at all, right? These can be from reasons like, they're bad counter picks, right? They're only good into specific champions. They're mostly just useful in specific low elos, or they just demand an insanely high amount of skill with them to operate, right? That's just for C tier, okay? So, let's just get right into it. Let me drink my tea here. Black tea. All right, so first off, Camille. Now, we were all, talking about how the nerfs to Camille earlier on, where I nerfed her attack speed on an E, were just basically, they basically accomplished nothing, and that is really the case here. Camille is, by the way, I've ordered everything alphabetically, right? So it's not like in an order of Camille's the strongest, like it's alphabetically, right? So Camille is an insanely strong pick, and one of her great strengths is that, like, you can basically brute force her through like a lot of champs licks. The thing about a lot of champions here, right, like let's say a Darius or like a Jax or something, is that like you can pick them, but if the enemy like gets a certain come together, you're gonna have an insanely hard time. Camille, though she does have, there are things in the game that make life hell for her. She's way more general than a lot of these champions, and that she can just brute force her way through champs like so, like. She's basically one of the most perfect champions to one trick, right? Also, like she can still bypass the laning phase by abusing grasp, right? By abusing grasp inspiration, she can still bypass the laning phase, and if you're skilled enough at her, you can get ignite teleport and actually threaten to win some lanes that you would, typically have problems with, right? So Camille's a very, very powerful top laner and is basically a staple choice. The only thing that would hold her back is that she needs, like, you have to kind of put time into her to get the most out of her. But if you put time into her and you know what she does, you can properly operate her, then it's completely worth it, right? She's an insanely, like, powerful champion. Next, Cho'gath. So Cho'gath, like, he's basically been like the very definition of a sleeper OP pick, in that, like, while Riot was handing out nerfs and buffs, Cho'gath slowly creeped his way up to the top, right? Cho'gath is insanely powerful in trades. He can just sustain so much up in lane, right? If it's a Cho'gath player who knows how to play the champion, then, he's just gonna he's gonna have an insane time in lane, and outside of lane as well, because he's one of the best tanks in the game, really, right? He does a very he does a very good amount of damage. He's got a lot of good utility, and he has a silence, which is very, very strong in this meta, right? Silences are one of the most like in our meta with all these Katarinas, Yones, and etc. just flying around. Silences are very, very, very powerful. So Cho'gath is very good at peeling for his team, is very good at going for picks, is very good at catching people, and he can actually put up a fight by himself, right? And as an added bonus, his ultimate is like an extra smite should the jungler fall. So he's a very, very powerful champion, and definitely a solid addition to your champion pool if you need like a tank. Darius, our favorite champion. Now, Darius has been like one of the strongest champions in top lane for all of season 11. Actually, I would say until they nerfed his bleed, he was like top 2 at least, or top 3. I think top 3, yeah, because Malphite and Camille were insanely broken early season, right? So yeah, he was top 3, but then they nerfed his bleed. But he's still arguably top 5, and he's definitely S tier, right? Darius is an insanely powerful Soloq champion because he's very good at exploiting mistakes, right? Before, in the previous seasons, to do much with Darius, you had to win lane. Now that's no longer the case. You just have to have good macro and team fighting, right? You basically just have to make sure that you walk out of lane strong enough to just snowball and just collect kills in a team fight. And all that has to happen for you to do that is for someone on the enemy team to mess up, right? If someone on the enemy team messes up enough, you as a Darius player, if you're perceptive enough, can just take that and use it to murder the entire enemy team, right? Darius is a very, very powerful champ given the right player. It's just that he gets kind of awkward to play in some elos. Okay, if you pick him early on in the champ select, the enemy team can very easily just form a team around making sure that you are as worthless as possible, right? So there are cases where, you get a Zillion on the enemy team, or a Lulu or something, or a long-range control mage or something, or a team built around a carry. Just, he can be very, you can't get him through every champion select, is what I mean, right? There are some team compositions that he just struggles very hard against. But, if you know what you're doing on Darius, then you're going to have an insanely good time on him. Fiora. Fiora is a very hated champion in top lane, but I think some of that is justified because Fiora can basically beat anyone, right? Or she can beat most people, right? She's a very, very skill demanding champion, right? And it takes a lot to understand how to play her properly against certain matchups, right? It takes a lot of mastery on the champion to be able to basically win some of these more difficult matchups. But if you do master her mechanics, master how to, quickly proc your vitals on someone, and by master, I don't mean just, going to the practice tool and doing some, 1 nanosecond for, vitals proc. I mean learning how to trade against champions, right? Knowing what champions do, when to go in, when to not go in, when to fight, when to back off, all these things, right? If you can kind of build together a solid knowledge base on Fiora, she's an insanely powerful pick for you as a top laner, and you can pretty much BS your way through a lot of matchups and etc. Right? The very good thing about Fiora is she's one of the very few champions. She, Camille, Riven in a certain way, not as much, but still, Riven, like Fiora and Camille are two of the best split pushers in the current meta, right? Especially at higher elos. Okay, Fiora I would say is the best split pusher, but yeah, that's up to debate. It depends on what people are referring to. And if you're going lower elo, you might go for something like a Tryndamere or a Yorick, but still, right? She's an insane powerful split pusher. You can get a lot done. The only weakness I would say she has is that her team fighting is like not very good, right? She's more of like the slippery 1v1 sort of champion rather than like a juggernaut who team fights. So you have to basically adopt a bit of a different playstyle, but she's very good at what she does, right? So given the right player, she can get a lot done. Garen. Now, I only put Garen here because this is more of like a low. I want this like tier list to cater to both high elo and low elo players, right? I'll just put him in like okay, right. I'm gonna put him in A tier instead. Like my relationship with Garen is quite weird, in that like if this was a high elo tier list, he'd be here in B tier, right? But because like in silver or bronze or like iron even, Garen is the best top laner because none of you guys down there know what you're doing, right? So just spamming Garen is like your way to get out of there basically, right? Garen is a very, very strong champion, especially in the lower elos, where like he does a solid amount of damage. He has a silence, which is great. He has a pretty easy to use execute, which lets you just dispose of champions instantly. But the issue with Garen is that he's like very, very one-dimensional, which means that he runs into problems in higher elos because as Garen, there's nothing you can do to outplay your opponent, right? You're just a one-dimensional meathead, and it is up to the enemy to outplay you, right? There's no tricks, there's no mechanics, there's just Q, E, R, and maybe sometimes the occasional usage of your W, right? That's just it for Garen, right? So from the perspective of a higher elo player, he is not, like, he's basically B tier, but I know that for some of you low elo players, he's gonna be like the optimal pick, so I put him at A tier, right? Next, Malphite. Now, I put Malphite at S tier because he isn't like the best tank, but he's arguably the easiest top laner to play in the game, right? If you're auto-filled, if your one trick is banned, if you don't know what you're doing, then pick Malphite, right? Malphite is very, very, very easy to play. And the only case I can think of where, you actually can't pick him is if, where picking him is a bad idea is, if they have an AP comp or if they pick Silas into you. But aside from that, Malphite is an insanely, he's an insanely easy character to play. Very, very simple. Very simple mechanics, right? Very little, things you have to understand. You just read the abilities and you're good at him already, right? And for how easy he is, if you have a bit of patience on him, you can accomplish a lot with Malphite, right? You can even win lane with him because of how well he trades under certain circumstances, like into certain champions, right? Into some of the more auto-attacking bruisers like Jax and etc., right? So, yeah, Malphite can be a monster if he's ahead, just 1v9ing team fights, destroying a whole backline. And the good thing about him and a lot of these tanks is that even if he falls behind, he can still be very, very useful, just because of the nature of his ultimate, right? His ultimate is among the best in the game. It's just instant. Like, it's so fast, and you can flash R and just, start things by yourself and, carry team fights. So he's a very, very solid pick, right? Ornn. Ornn is a very, very, very overloaded tank, right? He's very, very powerful. He does a lot of damage in lane, and his laning is basically why I put him at S tier, because of all the tanks, he's probably the best laner. His trading is so insanely well. If you go into a quick trade with Ornn, you're gonna lose half his HP and it's just gonna like dash away or something, and you won't be able to hit back. And the worst part about the Ornn lane is he has free sustain because he can just buy items in lane, right? So the longer the lane goes without either of you going back to base, the more powerful he is gonna be, right? Riot have added a ton of things to him that, in my opinion, should not have been added because I hate this champion. But you know, I can't deny that he's very, very powerful. He's just like, if an Ornn gets ahead, he is this insane ball of stats that just cannot be like, you know, dealt with. You know, he's just insane to like, you know, try to kill. So yeah, that's why I think that like Ornn is at S tier here, because he's just like he's very strong in lane, and once you get him out of lane, like, I don't think I have to describe why having like a strong Ornn out of lane is like terrifying for the enemy team, because there's so much he can do, right? He can just like start and destroy team fights on his own. If a fight happens in the jungle, he can basically just knock up everyone and just completely tear up the fight by himself. And on top of that, he does a ton of damage. So he's very good at just like holding down lanes and 1v1ing, right? So he's an insanely good champion. It's just that if he starts falling behind, it does get kind of sad in that he just can't do that much damage-wise, and all he is basically an ultimate bot. But, you know, you really shouldn't be losing lane on him because of how good his laning is, right? Riven. Riven is an insanely strong character because, like, she is very, very versatile, right? Similar to her Camille, she's insanely versatile. You can get her through a lot of champion selects. And if, like, AI were to control the chick, like, if, like, this was the perfect world, I guess, League was played by the AI, then Riven would be one of the strongest characters because, like, in Soloq, that is. Because, like, if he, like, Riven is basically, like, a massive toolbox, right? There are so many like tools in her toolkit, right? There are so many things she can do. And what you do with those tools is up to the player, right? If you're good enough, you can basically do anything fit into any team comp. You can split push, you can roam, you can go for cheesy flanks, you can go for, you know, plays on either side of the map. You can, you know, split and roam, and you can just team fight, you can frontline, you can peel, you can do a lot with this champion. And, you know, like, I would put her A because she takes a lot of skill and knowledge, right? But the thing about her is that, like, she's just so insanely powerful when mastered that I had to put her in S tier, right? She's just very, very, like, strong when mastered, so I put her in S tier, right? Shen. Now, Shen is almost always gonna be, like, S tier, in my opinion. There's never gonna be a world where Shen isn't S tier, and honestly, they just buffed Shen. Like, I don't get it, what it is with Riot Games and why they want to keep buffing Shen. It's some sort of, you know, degenerative disease in the heads of Yetter or the balance team or something. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I'm an engineer, but still, like, it's just insanely annoying how they just buff this champion when he's already S tier, right? Shen is arguably top one. Like, he's probably like, I'm willing to bet that Shen's the best top laner right now, right? Top 2 at, like, the lowest, right? Shen is, like, the thing that makes him strong is that, like, in the current state of the game, right, when bot lane is more important, not more important than the map, but, like, the bot lane is the most important part of the map, Shen is one of the few top laners that can have impact on bot lane without losing many things top lane. The reason top lane is kind of irrelevant is that if you try to go bot lane and help them out for any meaningful amount of time, your opposing top laner will have so much XP, so much gold, and so much turret plating, right? Because top lane turrets, like, are usually, like, the first to go down unless, you know, a bot lane wins hard, like, very hard, right? Top lane is kind of designed that way. If you look at the like all the outer turrets, top lane turret has, like, the least armoring. Not the least armoring, but, like, basically if you hit a turret early on into the game, your damage is, like, cut, right, by the turret. And this expires on every turret at different times, right? And this protection expires on top lane the fastest, right? So yeah, you can't be leaving your turret at top lane for too long because your enemy top lane is gonna get 2 waves, 3 plates, and unless you basically wipe the whole enemy team out and get a Drake, it's not gonna be worth it, right? And Shen does not have that problem, right? And on top of that, he's insanely strong in lane at level 6. I mean, pre 6, right? He trades very, very well, right? There's a lot of outplay you can do on him. His auto attacks hurt like hell. And if you're fighting against someone who doesn't really know how Shen works, you can basically just win the game by yourself, right? He's a very nice 1v9 champion, right? So he's definitely a staple pick and S tier for sure, right? And for basically all of time. Urgot. Now, Urgot is another like sleeper OP pick, kind of like Cho'gath, where like nobody's paying too much attention to him, but he just crept his way up here. I've been kind of telling this for a while. Like I've been recommending him to a lot of my coaching students, but basically Urgot is an insanely powerful champion. He's basically like I would say a high elo Garen in that you basically just like you're like a tank that does damage, right? It's like if you can get ahead in lane as Urgot, then you're basically like this frontline wall of death where you just keep walking on top of the enemy and just killing whatever like comes under your hand, right? It's like he can kill anything, tanks, squishies, whatever. He can one-shot squishies, he can snipe people, he can like peel for his team. There's a lot that this guy can do, right? If he fall behind in lane, it does become a bit like, annoying. But the good thing about Urgot is that if you just side lane and farm up to level 13 and get your, W, then, you're still going to be insanely strong because Urgot has arguably one of the strongest level 13 power spikes in the whole game, right? He's insanely strong if he has his items and if he is built properly, right? So, yeah, Urgot is just an insanely strong champion and I highly recommend him, especially due to how he's kind of simple to play, right? He's not actually like, you don't have to be a mechanical god like Riven. You don't have to know the basics like Shen. You just kind of have to get on him and, start playing him basically, right? So he's a very good champion. All right, now that we're done with our S tier, let's move on to our A tier, right? Because we're already at 20 minutes, I'll try to be a bit more concise in my explanations. Try being the keyword here. Aatrox. Aatrox has always been a solid pick for all of Season 11. I really I can get that there is some complaint in season 10 of how of his strength. I personally didn't really care too much for these strengths. I think he was still strong, but Aatrox is having a wonderful time into season 11 and he's been strong for the whole season and he's still strong now, right? The difficult part about learning him is just knowing how to land his Qs, knowing your matchups. But if you can get out of lane, Aatrox can be a very, very powerful pick to have on your team. His team fighting is insanely strong, and Aatrox can just pop his ult and do a ton of damage, AoE, a ton of CC. So if your team is slightly ahead, Aatrox can be that deciding factor to just close the game out because his ultimate just revolves around getting kills after kills after kills after kills, right? He's very powerful outside of lane, and he takes a lot of skill to play him in lane, which is why he's not S tier, right? He takes a lot of things to play him in lane. And also, there's a lot of lanes that can make his life a nightmare, and some team comps that just make his life a nightmare as well. But the thing is, because of how he basically does a ton of AoE CC damage, he's almost always going to be applicable regardless of the team, unless they have a very hyper mobile kitey comp. Where you might have to go for Strybreaker or something, but even then, you can still play him, right? Illaoi. Illaoi is a very hit or miss champion, right? I think if you pick Illaoi into the right, teams, right comps, right lanes, she can be like an insane monster. But it's just that she's kind of like Garen in that she's a low elo pick, right? If you go to a high elo, players kind of understand that she's a very one-dimensional lane in that if she misses E, kill her. If she lands it, then, run away, right? And people understand this in teamfights. And in teamfights, people just either run away from her or just straight one-shot her because this is Season 11 and people do kill things fast, right? She can just be locked down. I've seen this happen a lot. Well, I mean, the thing is, when I do play as Illaoi, I usually win, so they're not even that strong. But even I've seen this happen to a few times with stronger Illaoi players where they just get caught in a team fight. They hit a 2-3 man ult, like including the spirit, of course, right? And then they just get one shot, right? Because they can't really hit people with their technicals fast enough, right? She's a very situational pick. She can be like very easily just taken care of by a few picks and by smart teams, right? So she's basically not that much of an option into higher elos. But in low elo, she's a very decent pick, right? Irelia. Irelia is like, she takes a lot of wave control knowledge and etc. to play properly. But in return for all that, like, you get an insanely powerful champion to play. In my opinion, right, Irelia is not as hard to play as she seems, okay? I think it's kind of BS that we think Irelia is on the tier of like Fiora, Riven, or Yasuo, especially not Yasuo. But still, though, like, she's not on the tier of any of those champions in terms of difficulty. She's easier than she looks, right? It does take a lot of high elo knowledge to play her properly, but like, you know, she just has so much stats in lane that if you can basically, like, you know, if you can have the minions in the right spot to quickly stack your passive, or if you already stack your passive and your enemy wants to die, then you can get a lot done. She's insanely good in segmented team fights where the enemy is not that coordinated, and if she gets fed, she can legitimately 1v9, right? The difficult part when playing Irelia is just understanding how to basically play into specific matchups, right? But beyond that, you know, she's a very solid A tier pick, and if this was high low, she would be S, right? But it's not, so whatever. I've already covered Garen. Jax. Now, Jax, like, a lot of people tell me that Jax is not the best right now, but, you know, in my opinion, he's still a very strong champion, especially when you pick him as a counter, right? He can be picked as a counter to a lot of champions. And the thing about Jax is that if he gets ahead, he can legitimately 1v9. I've also seen a few people like try some weird builds on him and make him work in Challenger, which is very, very interesting in my opinion, right? So, like, you know, like, Jax, like, he's more flexible than he seems. And, like, if you pick him into the right team, into the right champion, then there's a lot you can do on him. But I just think that his weakness, much like a lot of the champions in A tier, is that there are some comps and etc. that make him unplayable, right? That's just his like personal weakness. But aside from that, he's a very strong pick in my opinion, right? Kled. Kled is an insanely powerful solo queue, you know, champion. Very, very strong. If you can learn how to win laning as him, you can legit 1v9. Your ultimate helps you just carry fights, just clear the whole entire enemy team. Very strong. I put him in A tier because of how much, you know, specific one tricky skill that he requires. Maokai. Maokai is not like the other tanks in that he's not as strong in lane. He's very, very weak in lane, actually, but to make up for that, he's got insane amounts of teamfight utility. He's got point-and-click CC, which is insanely powerful. And yeah, he's just like a very nice team slave champion. The buff to Set made him a very, very powerful champion, and if this was a higher elo tier list, I would put him higher up. But the thing about Set is that there's not a lot of solo 1v9 carrying you can do, not a lot of playmaking. He's kind of just like, you know, his weakest point is higher than a lot of champions, but his strongest point is just below a lot of these champions. Like, Darius in his strongest is like a god, basically, right? Set in his strongest is just a demigod, basically, right? Still powerful, but like, you know, not the most insane solo queue thing, right? And what this basically means is that, like, if your team is coordinated and whatnot, he's S tier. But because some of you guys are lower elo, he's gonna be stuck, like, you know, in lower tiers because, like, you know, you can't just play him solo into some cases, right? He does not have the mobility for that. Tryndamere. Tryndamere is an insanely powerful pick given the right player. He's kind of like, he kind of suffers the same thing as Jax. There are team fights, there are champions, matchups, and team comps that make life hell for him. And yeah, he's a very powerful split pusher, though, right? So, you know, if you know how to get kills on Tryndamere, you can for sure 1v9 your games, right? Yorick. If this was he's basically A tier because, like, I'm kind of carrying to low elo with his tier list. If this was a high tier list, he'll be B tier. But yeah, Yorick, he was overpowered for a patch, but then they brought him down, so he's been a very decent pick. The thing about Yorick is that, like, he's kind of like very, very strong into immobile lanes, and if Yorick wins lane, it doesn't have, like, if you know how to win lane on Yorick, you're just gonna be an insane monster, right? You might not be the best at team fighting, but a split pushing Yorick takes like 2-3 people to kill consistently, right? And even then, he can sometimes just take people out, like who are just like trying to get to him, right? He's very, very strong once ahead. It's just like getting him ahead is the hard part, right? And in high elo, people will recognize this and just, you know, bust him down. So he'll be like way lower on like a high elo tier list. But in low elo, the junglers down there are brain damaged. So, you know, he's gonna be a pretty good pick for you guys. Wukong. I would say Wukong is like, you know, he's got a lot of mechanics that make him very, you know, difficult to beat. He's a very strong champion in my opinion, and he scales insanely well. He's an insanely well like scaler in terms of like his usefulness in team fights. He does a lot of team fights, right? His ultimate is very powerful. He's a very big source of damage, and his invisibility allows him to basically like survive in the front line for longer than he deserves to, right? But I just think that he works better with a more coordinated team, right? In a like, I would arguably put him S tier, or you know, he'd be high A tier if this was a higher low tier list. But he's A tier because, you know, in lower elo, it might not be the best idea to play him because your jungler won't always recognize that it's good to put gold into you, and you might be just left alone, right? But if you can play Ignite Wukong and just get ahead every lane, then, you know, you're going to be able to 1v9 your games. Rumble. I don't know why Riot added those changes to Rumble. Again, another one of Riot's, you know, asinine decisions. I'm kind of starting to hate this company. I mean, I already hate this company, but all those things that they added to Rumble turned him from like a high elo only pick to just an overpowered pick in general, right? Rumble is insanely strong in the right roles, and he's so strong that he can also be flexed into top lane versus some of these bigger bruisers, right? He's way too strong right now, and he should be nerfed ASAP, right? He's more of like a mid junglish champion, but he can still be, well, not junglish, but yeah. He's more of like a, he's not really the best top lane champion because top lane champions are kind of beefier and they can't kind of just put him down, but he's still very strong. Volibear. Volibear is kind of like Ornn in that he's a very, very strong lane tank. But the thing between Volibear and Ornn is that Ornn doesn't have to win lane. Ornn will be strong eventually anyway. He just has to be even. But Volibear has to win lane and get kills to be strong, right? A Volibear that's behind is basically just nothing. He's not tanky, he doesn't do damage, he doesn't do anything. But Ornn that's ahead, he does a ton of damage, he does like he just does everything, right? Damage, CC, etc. And you can 1v9 on him, right? It's just, you have to learn how to win your lane on him. That's just like his weakness here, right? Okay, B tier, the higher elo picks, the skill requiring picks, whatever, right? Akali. Akali is not too strong early game, so you do have to know a lot of wave management to play her properly. She does get stomped by a lot of top laners, and she does require an intense amount of mechanical skill. But with all those things being said, she's an insanely good pick, right? Let me put Lee here as well, actually, right? Because he's among the same lanes as, you know, Akali, right? So yeah, she's insanely strong given the right player, and if you're a talented top laner, you can make a lot of good work off of her, right? You can pick her into certain team compositions where she's required to basically dive the backline, get a bunch of kills, or, you know, create space for your team using your shroud and whatever. So yeah, Gangplank, like the Gangplank player has to be high elo because in low elo, the Gangplank does not know enough about the game to make full use of his kit. But the better everybody else gets, the better the Gangplank also gets because, like, Grass allows him to stonewall so many lanes, and he can have impact on the map because of his global ultimate. He farms insanely well, and once he gets to 2-3 items, he's like an insane teamfight threat. It's just that, like, it takes a lot of knowledge to get him past laning, right? Knowledge that a lot of low elo players are not going to have. Gnar is not exactly the best champion in low elo because, like, he's a very generalist champion in that he's good at a lot of things, but he's just not the best at anything, right? What this means is that, like, if this was a high elo tier list, I'd put him at A tier or even S tier in some cases, you know, because, like, you know, with a Gnar that's ahead or even, you can get a lot done. He can split push, he can team fight, he can win whole fights with him by himself using his ultimate, etc. Because he's got a lot of stats in his Mega Gnar. He can do a lot of fighting as well. But in low elo, it's like, he needs follow-up to be helpful, to be good, right? He needs follow-up. He needs help, right? And you can't count on intelligence in low elo. Gragas. The sole reason Gragas is here is because he has a good matchup into a lot of these champions, right? Gragas trades insanely well, and with Phase Rush, he's basically like, he's virtually unkillable in lane, right? So Gragas is an insanely powerful champion if given the right player. It's just that, like, you know, he takes a lot of one-tricky knowledge to play properly, right? So you gotta one-trick him to play him top lane properly. Gwen, she's the new champion, new kid on the block, I guess you could call it. She's very strong when ahead. I just don't think she's that strong in lane. Aside from level 1, where she gets this insane attack speed strategy that, you know, Riot thought it was a good idea to add to her for some reason. You know, aside from level 1, I don't see her winning against a lot of these top laners, you know, level 2, 3 onwards, and even at level 6, right? Because her ultimate is a very slow ultimate, right? You know, it's a very slow, it takes a lot of time, but like, let's say a Garen ultimate, bam, insta-death, right? You know, a lot of these ultimates are faster, or like, you know, they're more stronger than hers at the level 6 fight. So, like, she's not the best at winning lane, right? But if she gets ahead, she's a team fighting monster. She can get a lot done. She's very hard to put down, so yeah, she's B tier. Heimerdinger. Heimerdinger works as a very specific counter pick. He's just, like, he's very good if there's nothing happening in top lane, so that he can just park his fat ass in top lane and just sit there and do nothing, right? But, like, you know, if there's a lot of fights happening around top lane, then that's where Heimerdinger starts becoming weaker, because, like, he has to basically set up to, like, set up with his turrets and etc. to do a lot to do well, right? He needs setup time, right? And when there's a lot of fast fights happening around top lane, he can't quite follow up with them too well, right? He throws a stun grenade out, his W, and maybe leaves a turret behind, and that's it, right? He can just get one shot. So yeah. But if it's just a 1v1 or a 2v1, right? Like, basically, if you're being left alone top lane, he's a very powerful pick. Jace is a very, very strong pick, very strong in lane. If he gets ahead, he can just destroy people on the turret. He's insanely strong in team fights. He just takes a lot of skill, a lot of matchup knowledge, and he's very, like, feast or famine in that if he fucks up, he's just gonna get destroyed, right? He's not gonna do anything. Kennen is not the best laner by far. You know, a lot of the matchups he used to win, like Darius, are no longer winning matchups because of, you know, the season and how it works. But if you have the skills to get Kennen through the laning phase, he's a very nice team fighting champion, right? He can do a lot of work in team fights. Just walk into the enemy backline, stun everyone, Zhonya's, and just, you know, almost one-shot people. So he's very strong if one-trick, basically, right? But aside from that, I wouldn't say he's the best. Mordekaiser has a lot of difficulties right now. He used to be A tier before, but now he's basically S tier. The biggest problem with him is that, like, he just doesn't have a good build, good mythic, in my opinion, right? He just doesn't have, like you can build Riftmaker on him, right? Like, that's the good build, but I don't know, nothing just, you know, fits him, if you get what I mean. Like, Strybreaker fits Darius, you know? Like, you know, Triforce fits Camille, you know? It's like things fit champions, nothing fits Mordekaiser, which is why I think he's kind of like, yeah, you know, in a tough spot, so to speak, right? But, you know, if you can kind of survive until 2 items, then he does become like an insane team fight monster. And on top of all that, his ultimate makes it so that he's almost always going to be useful, as long as you're able to use it properly. Poppy, she's a very like feast or famine tank, which is rare. The only other one is Volibear, but even like more so than Volibear, she's insanely feast or famine. If she gets behind, then there's not much she can do. But thankfully, she has a lot of mechanics and tools in her kit, which allow her to get ahead and grind out a lot of leads, right? I put her in B tier because, like, you have to basically one-trick her insanely hard to make a lot of use of her. Quinn, she's basically one of the best ranged top laners because she can roam, but at the end of the day, she's still a ranged top laner. Ranged top laners are not the best in top lane, especially in, like, you know, I would say in higher elos, ranged top laners are not the best unless you play something for your team composition. Because, like, a ranged top laner can be very, very easily exploited, right? A Vayne top or a Quinn top is basically jungler food, right? It's free food. Because once you get on top of them, there's not much they can do. And Quinn is no exception, right? So, yeah. If you can basically get through lane with her, she's very powerful, but because you can basically roam and impact the whole map. But, you know, you like her laning just isn't like that strong unless you're a direct counter pick to like a Renekton or something, right? What the hell happened here? Anyway. Pantheon, alright. So, okay, whatever. Alright, Pantheon, I would say Pantheon takes a lot of skill and knowledge to play, because a lot of the bruiser matchups he can do very well against initially, but then he just gets outscaled, especially level 6 when a lot of these champions get combat ultimates and he does not. But, you know, if you can position the lane properly, you can do a lot. And the good thing about Pantheon is he's very strong when you're playing with a jungler, right? When you're playing for a jungler, he can do a lot because he's got point and click CC, he's got damage. His ultimate lets him roam to any part of the top side of the map or even bot lane if he wants to. Like, he's very good if you're a duo queue, I guess, right? So yeah, Pantheon is strong if you're a bit coordinated, especially in higher heroes, I guess. Higher heroes, he'll be, I think, like high B tier or low A tier, I guess. Oh, actually, high B tier because he's more of a mid lane champ, I think. Renekton. Some of you might disagree with me on this, but Renekton has been kind of horrible in the current season, right? He's just horrible, man. Like, there's not much way to say it. He's not as strong as he used to be. He's basically just like, he's very good at dives. He's very good at playing with your jungler. So if you're duo queue, he's very good. But it's just that, like, the avenues through which he could just get fed and carry are just not there anymore. And the game is just way faster, right? To play Renekton, you need coordination, right? So if it was higher elo, I would say it's fine. Or like, pro play, he's probably one of the most popular top laners in pro play. But in solo queue route, I just don't see Renekton being that valuable. Rengar top is like, I respect the hell out of Rengar top. And honestly, like, you can do a lot with Rengar top. A proper Rengar top player can, you can flex your build to anything depending on your team comp. You can go like AD if you're a source of damage. You can go booster if you got a front line, but you're still a source of damage. You can go, full CDR with Zhonya's, if you gotta go in and disrupt. If you're basically a WW bot, you gotta do a lot of AP damage, you can go Cosmic Drive, spam abilities as well. There's a lot you can do on this champion. I put him at B tier because of his insane skill curve, right? He is very, very difficult to get a hang of. Sion is kind of like a similar case in that, like, you have to one-trick him to be, like, insanely good at him. If you don't one-trick him, you're just going to be like a regular old tank, right? But if you know how to build damage on him, etc., and make, exploit those kinds of things, exploit vision, make use of those things, then he's a very, very strong champion, right? It's just that he takes a lot of specific knowledge to play at B tier. Teemo. He just, like, suffers from, like, the curse of being a ranged top laner, but unlike other ranged top laners, he's just even easier to kill because he has no mobility or self-peel. But on the bright side with Teemo is that, like, a Teemo that can effectively use his shrooms is very, very powerful, right? He can give a lot of vision, he can give a lot of traps, and a Teemo that spams shrooms forces the enemy team to be coordinated, because if they're not, they just start getting broken apart, right? One by one, the shrooms just chip away at them, right? So if you can get past laning phase and build some AP on Teemo, then, you can basically just chunk people out for no reason, right? You just have to have the macro to, like, put the shrooms in the right spots. Vayne top. I've already made my criticisms of range top laners, but Vayne top is basically just good versus certain matchups. The weakness of Vayne top is that you're kind of messing up your team composition by picking a range top laner. And also because she's very easy for the jungler to just get kills off of, right? And also in early fights, right? In a 1v1, she's kind of broken, but in an early fight, let's say 2v2 or like, like a 3v3 in the river, she's kind of horrible, right? All she does is just auto attack and maybe line a condemn, whereas the other champions could just destroy her, right? Viego. Viego has a somewhat difficult time getting out of lane versus certain champions, right? A lot of these champions can make life a nightmare for him, but once he gets out of laning phase, or God forbid he gets ahead, he can just get an insane amount done, right? I would just say that in low elo, he's just not the best pick. Not because, like, it's some, circle jerk about, oh, you have to know how to play every single champion. That's not why, he's, like, unplayable in low elo. It's just that, like, in low elo, like, players in low elo, if they lose, if they lose lane, they lose lane, right? They die 7-8 times, 0 CS, and if you do that on Viego, you might as well be inting. Well, you're probably already inting, but you might as well just not be connected because you're basically not even a champion at that point, right? Viego just you need to basically low players lack the ability to bring him back into a game, basically, right? Yone, I've seen a lot of insanely talented players do a lot with his champion in top lane, right? And he's basically just here purely based off of all that, the skill he requires to play. He's kind of similar to Yasuo, but Yone is a very overloaded champion, right? Yone is very broken and overloaded, which is why he is a legitimate pick instead of just relegated to the C tier, right? Vladimir can work if you can consistently get him to 2 items, but I just dislike him on higher elo because he can't do too much for his jungler early on, right? He can't do too much to set up ganks. He's basically just not a character until 2 items, right? Which is why I dislike having him, right? Lee Sin. Lee Sin is kind of like a cheese pick right now. Lee Sin top. If you have the mechanics to make him work, you can do a lot with him. He's just not a solidified pick right now. The thing with Lee Sin is that you can go for a lot of weird trades, right? You can go for a lot of weird trades and then just sustain back up, right? Because it's W, lifesteal, and etc. Let him sustain very fast in lane and just get back into the fight in no time, right? So yeah, you take a fight against Lee Sin, you lose, let's say, 400 HP, whereas he loses half his HP, but then he heals everything back up. And you're basically left at an HP disadvantage, right? So he can afford to lose trades and just sustain back up. So yeah, he's very, very powerful. Now we're at C tier. These are the horrible champions. Champions you should basically stay away from. Mundo. A lot of people think he's strong, but I don't share this opinion, honestly. And really, he's gonna get reworked soon, so I wouldn't recommend putting too much time into him. And also, you have to get ahead with him to win, but getting ahead with him is easier said than done, right? It's just so insanely difficult to play him, right? So yeah, I wouldn't recommend him at all. Kale, right? Very weak early on, requires a lot of team play to properly play her. She's basically a high elo pick only, right? I would say she's not really that much of a pick in low elo, wherever you guys are playing. So yeah, I wouldn't really have her in your champion pool unless you're high elo, right? And that bug, I ran into it multiple times, as you guys saw. So yeah, I just won't touch the champions. Lucian is a very solid range top laner. He's not a very solid, he's basically one of the worst range top laners in that his matchups are among the worst, right? And you have to play him very perfectly to get him through laning phase, right? A lot of these champions, once they hit level 6 and etc. and get their abilities, just kill Lucian, right? They just kill him, right? So you have to play him properly, right? And a lot of, I don't know. He just takes too much skill, and what you get out of that skill is basically nothing if the enemy players have intelligence. Nasus, low elo pick, makes 0 sense to put any time into him. Very worthless, right? And unlike Garen or Illaoi, you can't even force him into Diamond or whatever. He's just kind of horrible, right? Especially in this meta where it doesn't matter how strong you are, you just get one shot by the enemy. But backline, and he's not exactly very tanky or he can't just jump on the enemy. He just walks, right? And if the enemy ADC has peel, he's just dog meat. Olaf, cheese pick. Can't do much in in lane. If behind, the game is just lost basically. Needs a lot of knowledge to basically play the fights out, and you gotta land your axes and all that. So yeah, C tier, just niche pick if you're very good at him, I guess. Rise is never gonna be a good pick aside from top 200 challenger where you can kind of flex him sometimes, and even then some of these other champions are better. Just not a recommended pick, right? Singed, very cheese pick. Requires a ton of knowledge and a ton of skill to play. Generally not recommended at all, but he's still here as a participation award, I guess. Yasuo, this is the hardest champion in the game, especially at high elo, so I don't think I would recommend to play him in top lane. He takes a lot of skill, the most skill, and unlike Yone, he's a balanced champion, so you can't just brute force him into some team compositions. This guy's broken as fuck and unfair. This guy isn't, so he's not the best champion. Some lanes just destroy him. Swain, I would say Swain is just like probably the worst ranged top laner, even worse than Lucian. Right? He's ranged, but like he can't actually do that well of a poking. If he gets caught, he dies. He can't really self peel. He's okay if you get like a few items on him, but that's just it, right? Top lane needs to be a bit stronger earlier on. All right, that is pretty much it for this video, guys. I got a little dehydrated at the end there, but yeah, that's what you get when you talk for almost an hour. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.